Shannon from Practice Indie Yoga here, expanding on our Just the Tip Tuesday video about how to do or break down advanced postures so that they are accessible. So a question that comes up often when we lead teacher trainings is, should I teach a pose that I cannot personally do? And as a practitioner, should I practice a pose that feels well beyond my capabilities? And the answer is yes and. So yes, in that the practice of yoga is not about the accomplishment of the pose, but rather the journey to the pose. So yes, you should be practicing towards these larger poses. Yes, you should be guiding your students towards these larger poses. However, that needs to be informed by what our actual experience is. So this week's pose is Vishvamitrasana. And what we're gonna do is, it's really forking hard, by the way, and like just kind of advanced. So this is BKS Iyengar Light on Yoga. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the pose in its most advanced version, and then we're gonna look at how we can break that down into different postures that look and feel like that. So perhaps if you're practicing, you can get a little bit closer to it, or if you're teaching, you can teach component parts of it without having to teach the full thing that may be out of your lens of experience. So I'm going to do the pose, and that's not to like show off. By the way, this pose is totally a thing I can do because I'm long as hail. I have literally no muscles in my legs, and I can lift more in my upper body than my lower body. So this is a perfect pose for me. But if we were to do something like leg over the head or anything involving hip stretching, I'd probably just sit there and cry. So everybody has their limitations, and even if you are unable to move from the waist down or the waist up, there's always a way that we can look at one piece of the puzzle to make the pose accessible in parts, if that makes sense. So let's look at the pose first. So the pose is an arm balance, a big groin hamstring stretch, and a big twist lateral bend situation. So this is actually not even the full thing. The full thing I would let my arm go, but that's not there for me. So let's look at a couple of things. Number one, how I came into it. What does this pose look like? Warrior two. Yeah, so this might be something I work on. It's just building the strength specifically of the back leg. If you'll notice in that pose, my back leg stayed anchored. So maybe I just work the back leg for a little bit and strengthening the back leg. Another pose that's inside of this pose, side angle. So maybe I work just getting closer and closer to that bound side angle. Maybe I just work on side angle in general. Another thing that's present here is that lateral flexion. So maybe working that big side stretch. Another thing as we look at the pose that needs to happen is I've got an AD duck, meaning this front leg has got to squeeze onto my knee. So a couple of things we might be able to do with that. Number one is crow pose. So even if crow is not a thing in your wheelhouse, getting set up in your variation of Malasana and just working the adduction strength that it requires to squeeze your knees into your triceps. Bhujapidasana is another one. Hands behind us if we can, hands to blocks, just squeezing the knees in, maybe getting to that place where we do the arm balance, maybe never. Maybe we're just squeezing the knees to our triceps. I could take that even down another notch. And maybe it's just squeezing a block in between my knees. A great exercise to do with a block in between your knees is bridge pose. So just starting to break down, okay, what's the back leg doing? What poses look like that? Warrior two, side angle, even triangle. What's the front leg doing? Okay, it's bent to a 90 degree. What looks like that? Warrior two, side angle. What's the upper body doing? Okay, it's in a side bend. What's a side bend? Maybe just building strength in Chandrasana, standing crescent moon pose. Okay, looks like that. What's my top arm doing? What's pulling that leg? Is there something I could do that makes that shape? Maybe that stretching, that pulling. Maybe I take a strap under my foot, grab it with the strap and pull, working that. Another thing that we see in that pose, side plank. Maybe I just work supported side plank. Maybe I work full side plank. So in every pose that is complex, and even in simple postures, we can start to say, okay, well, what is this section of the body doing? What pose looks and feels like that? Let's practice that. Okay, what is this section of the body doing? Let's work towards that. And as you experience those pieces, those component parts, you might be able to then say, okay, well, maybe I can't do the full thing like side plank, because maybe I'm not able to hold side plank, but what might be one step down? So if side plank is here, the next natural step is knee to the ground. If this is still too much because maybe you don't have the arm strength, maybe we're working just strengthening the obliques from here. Or maybe we're not even weight bearing. We're coming into goddess and doing some TikToks, right? Or going back to that Chandrasana. So just starting to look at the different shapes that the body is making, the different postures that look like that shape, and how can I start to break that up into more actionable, digestible pieces for myself or for my students that may or may not get me closer to the pose, right? Judith Lassiter said it, yoga is not about touching your toes, it's about the journey on the way down. So giving yourself permission to, as our pose or our focus this week is darshan, looking at it from a different viewpoint, looking at it from a divine space of, well, what do I have? What am I capable of? Instead of, well, fork it, I can't do that pose, I just quit. Because that's not the assignment. The assignment is to dive into what is accessible, and over time, through consistent practice, those things become available to us, or they don't, doesn't matter. It's about what goes on in between here as we go on that journey. So I hope that helps. If you're working Vishvamitrasana very specifically, work things like oblique strengthening, Chandrasana, side plank, work things like adduction strength, block in between the legs, work things like strong back leg, warrior two, side angle. There's a ton that you can work on without ever having to attempt that pose and still get an incredible practice and experience towards Vishvamitrasana. So I hope this was helpful, and be on the lookout. I'll have a worksheet maybe by the end of the week, probably next week, who knows, that we'll post in our newsletter and on Facebook that can help you, especially if you're a teacher, kind of work through lesson plans to get you to start to think in this way as more of a habit. So that's all. Namaste.